Hello guys. Tonight, we begin with your life as a candle maker in 14th century France. The days start early, not with songbirds or sunlight, but with the scrape of a wooden shutter and the dull clank of an iron kettle being shifted onto the hearth. You wake in the same way every day. The wool blanket is scratchy. The straw mattress underneath you is poking through with the sharp memory of a season too long used. And the first thing you smell is tallow. Always tallow. You didn't mean to become a candle maker. No one dreams of it. Not even in childhood games of village life, where children chase each other with sticks and make mud pies with a sense of consequence. But here you are. And this is your trade, melting animal fat and beeswax, drawing and trimming wicks. Watching the color of a hardening taper like others. Watch the skies for rain. The workshop is not large. It is a lean-to at the back of your home, with cracked stone walls and shelves that bow slightly under the weight of candle molds, dipping rods, pots, and carefully bundled flax wicks. Your tools are humble. A set of iron tongs, a blackened ladle, several molds of wood and tin, and a dozen long rods for dipping. Some were handed down, others you bartered for with spare candles. One, a fine brass mold, was payment for a job done in the dead of winter, when light was dear and money even dearer. Each candle you make is a small calculation of survival. There's the tallow, of course. You buy it from the butcher when you can, but most often you barter. A pound of candles for a bucket of offcuts. Or you render your own stirring for hours over a low flame, watching the fat melt, then strain, cool, and solidify. It never smells good. The neighbors wrinkle their noses. The dogs bark at your door, but the fat is yours. It is light. When you boil it long enough, it is gold in its own way. Beeswax is better. Beeswax is cleaner, slower to burn, sweeter on the nose, but it's reserved. Reserved for churches, for monasteries, for wealthy homes with silver spoons and linen-draped tables. You keep a block or two under lock, wrapped in linen and stored in the cool shade. You don't let your apprentice touch it, not yet. The apprentice is always a story in themselves. Yours is a boy from the next village over, sent to you because his family owed a debt and had too many mouths. He's 12, wiry, and quicker with questions than with hands. He burns himself often, drops the molds once a week, and once nearly set a drying rack on fire with a carelessly flung taper. But he watches closely. That's worth something. Maybe one day he'll be better than you. You show him how to cut the wicks to exactly the right length to short, and the flame sputters. Too long, and it smokes. You teach him the art of dipping, slow and steady, layer by layer, letting each coat cool before the next. He gets bored easily. So did you, once. Now, there is something meditative about it, a rhythm to the dunk, lift, and hang. The air thick with the smell of fat and effort. Your candles aren't beautiful, but they are honest. A good candle burns evenly. It lasts through prayer, through supper, through birth and death. People know your mark. A small cross scratched into the base with a knife, not for religion, but for identity, for reputation. You're not alone in this trade. There are others in your town, though not many. Some make theirs only with wax. Others specialize in rushlights, cheaper, quicker, little more than reeds dipped in fat. Some pass through during festival times with carts full of novelties, colored candles, braided ones, those shaped like saints or stars, but most of them don't stay. You do. You light the village, one wick at a time. The work is seasonal. Summer brings long days, fewer orders, and the difficulty of keeping tallow from spoiling. You store it in clay pots, sealed with wax, hidden under stone. Even then, sometimes it goes rancid. You know the smell. It clings to your hair, your hands, your clothes. The winter is when you earn. Every home needs light. Every altar. must glow. The long dark evenings sent people knocking at your door, sometimes with coin, often with trade, a sack of grain, a bolt of cloth, once even a piglet. You keep a ledger of sorts, chalk marks on a wall, promises made, candles given, but even winter has its challenges. The cold stiffens the wax, tack, fingers go numb. You burn your own candles sparingly, more scraps and drippings than full tapers. There's something strangely sad about burning your own work. Sometimes you wonder what life would be like with a different trade, cobbler perhaps, or a tailor. But those jobs don't smell of fat and fire. They don't teach you the patience of waiting for wax to cool. They don't make you listen to how silence fills a room lit by one small flame. Your hands are always slightly sticky, no matter how many times you scrub. It's a wax lodge in your fingernails along the cracks of your knuckles. It's part of the job. Like the way people look at you when you pass the unspoken knowledge that you deal in light, that their prayers, their deaths, their births are all a little brighter because of what you do. And still, no one really notices you. Not properly. Not unless a candle fails. Not unless a flame gutters out too quickly. That's when you get complaints, or worse, accusations. The candle was too short. The wax was thin. The wick was crooked. Never mind the rush job, or the bad fat they brought you. It's always your fault when the light dies, but you keep working, because it matters. Because no one really understands the importance of light until they're left in the dark. And because this is your place, you're a piece of the great unnoticed machine that keeps the world turning. And as the sun rises and you stoke the fire for the morning's first melt, you look at the table of half-finished candles and you wonder not for the first time who will hold them and why. What prayer will flicker above their flame? Secret will be whispered beside their light. And what happens when no one needs candles anymore? The streets are still quiet, except for a far-off rooster and the slap of a wet rag being thrown from a window. You roll up your sleeves while the hearth glows softly under yesterday's ashes. There's no rush. The fat won't melt any faster for your impatience. Hand. Rushing a pour always ends with a ruined taper or worse, burnt fingers. You feed the fire with care, placing the thin twigs and broken rushes just so before adding a wedge of split pine. The smoke twists upward, mixing with the faint sourness of old tallow. It's always in the air. It's always clinging to the walls, to your work table, to your very skin. You've long since stopped smelling it properly, but you know it's there. In your pores, your hair, your breath. Sometimes, even after washing, you still smell it on your hands as you lie down to sleep. The first pot is always the thickest. A mix of yesterday's scraps and new fat, lumpy and pale, more yellow-gray than anything else. You stir it slowly, letting it melt down into something workable. The surface gleams, oily and slightly lumpy, with the occasional bit of bone or tendon floating to the top. You scoop those out with a slotted spoon and drop them into a bucket to bury later. You've learned what happens if you leave them lying around dogs, rats, even small children with nothing better to do. The apprentice arrives late, of course. Always does on market mornings. He smells faintly of stable, muck, and sleep. His tunic is crooked, his eyes still half closed. You don't say much, just hand him the dipping rod and point him toward the warm pot. He groans at the sight of it. It's turned, he mutters. It's turning, you correct? Not turned. He stirs with obvious reluctance, muttering under his breath about the beeswax jobs he's read about noblemen's candle makers who work in silence, who don't smell like kitchens gone wrong, who don't have to boil animal fat at sunrise. You let him complain. He is still learning. He doesn't yet understand that the work of tallow is what most of the kingdom depends on. Beeswax may grace the altars, but but it's your candles that light the world. Once the pot is smooth and runny, you start the first dip. The wicks were strung yesterday. Long strands of twisted flax knotted onto the wooden rods, each spaced exactly apart, each cut to the length you know will burn steady and long. There's a rhythm to it. Lower the wicks, count to 4, lift them, let them hang. Wait. Again. Layer by layer, the candles take shape like stalactites in a cave formed slowly, silently, from patience and heat. Each rod takes the better part of an hour to build up. You hang them on a rack set near the window, where the air helps them cool between dips. The apprentice always wants to rush, always wants to dip again before the wax has hardened. You scold him when he does it, creates uneven tapers, thin patches, ugly drips, not fit to sell. He hates the waiting, but waiting is half the work. When the sun finally clears the rooftops and spills into your small window, the workshop begins to warm. You take off your outer tunic and hang it by the door. Sweat clings to your temples and spine, and the smell of hot tallow deepens, sharpens, becomes something sour and meaty. It is unpleasant, yes, but it is the smell of your livelihood. You know it as others know the scent of soil or horse or smoke, and you've learned how to work within its fog. There are hazards, of course. You keep water near the hearth and sand near the table. The fire never leaves your mind entirely. Not in a village where most homes are roofed and thatched in dry wood. One slip of a pot, one fallen taper, and it could all go. So you watch, you tend, you never let your attention wander. Mid-morning brings your first visitor. A woman from the edge of town, older, wrapped in a shawl, despite the heat. She brings a basket lined with rags and a small coin pouch. I need candles for a christening, she says. My daughter-in-law's due any day. You nod, wiping your hands on your apron. How many? 6 long ones, she says. Beeswax. If you have it. You glance at the apprentice. He looks hopeful. I have 2 in stock, you say. The rest would be tallow. She hesitates, but nods. Wrap the wax ones separate. They'll go to the priest. You measure out the candles with care, wrapping them in linen and sealing the ends with a loop of thread. She pays half now, half when she returns. That's normal. Trust, or at least necessity, keeps accounts honest. You chalk a mark on the doorframe. 6 candles. To wax. Payment pending. Once she's gone, the apprentice asks, why didn't you tell her we could make more wax ones? You shrugged, 'cause we can't. Not unless we want to run out before Sunday. She'd have paid. Doesn't matter if she pays, you reply. What matters is what we can deliver. Reliability builds trade, not promises. He doesn't like that answer. Okay? He's young, still full of dreams about profit and silver coin. But someday, maybe, he'll understand that a good reputation is more valuable than a heavy purse. The rest of the morning passes with more dipping, more cutting, more cooling. The second pot of tallow is poured from the cauldron into the mold racked in tin tubes, lined up like soldiers, wicks held in place by pins. You pour carefully, slowly, avoiding spills. The fat glistens as it cools, turning from clear gold to dull ivory. Sometimes you talk as you work, not always. Today, the apprentice asks questions about saints and candles, about how the abbey gets its wax, and whether candles can be dyed with berries or soot. You answer what you can. Yes, saints are often offered candles. No, berries don't dye well, they rot. Soot, maybe, for black. But who wants a black candle? He asks, what happens to candles that burn too fast? They get blamed for things, you say, for bad luck, bad prayers, bad births. They call it a sign, but it's just wax. Maybe, but people don't want explanations. They want signs. He seems to think about that when the midday bell tolls from the church tower. You take your break. Bread, cheese, and ale. The apprentice eats noisily, crumbs everywhere. You sit in the shade of the back step, letting the breeze lift the tallow stink from your skin for a few minutes. You wonder sometimes how many candles you've made in your life. Thousands, easily. Tens of thousands. So many small lights flickering. In windows, chapels, barns, cribs, coffins, each one with a purpose. Each one with a story you'll never know. There's something strange about that you can create something so important to people's lives and never be remembered for it. No one knows the name of their candle maker. They know the baker, maybe the tailor, but your light is anonymous, essential, but forgettable. You stand up and stretch, glancing toward the rack of hardening tapers, full molds, the morning's waste pile. The apprentice is already back at the pot, poking at a thickening skin of fat with his dipping rod. He still has a lot to learn. You take the chalk and mark another order on the wall. This one from the baker's wife, bundle of short candles, 10 in all, for her cellar, no doubt. She always underpays, but she always pays. You rub the chalk between your fingers, watching the dust fall to the dirt floor, and you think not for the first time about what it means to spend a life in wax and shadow. Because the truth is, the candles you make burn out. Every single one. None of them are made to last, and neither are you. But still, you make them. You always make them. And if you stopped, would anyone notice? The church bell rings twice before you hear the knock. Not a loud one. Not the kind that demands anything. Just a polite, cautious tap on the frame of your open door. You wipe your hands on your apron before you turn around, because it's good business to look clean, even if you never truly are. There, in the morning sun, stands one of the Lord's stewards. You know him by name Guillaume, son of a carpenter who married better than his tools would have allowed. He doesn't step inside. "I've come on behalf of the manor," says, glancing past you at the shelves. "They need a dozen beeswax tapers, all matching. All fine." You nod. Of course they do. There's likely a feast, or some visiting noble, maybe a priest who matters more than the local one. You never ask. The important part is that they need them, and they've come to you. "How soon?" you ask. He hesitates. "That's never a good sign." 3 days. You exhale slowly through your nose. Beeswax takes longer. You know that? He clears his throat. "You'll be paid double. That changes things. Not everything, but enough. I'll need access to the Abbey's wax." You say, knowing he doesn't want to hear it. "You can use what you have. I don't have enough for a matched dozen." He tugs at the cord around his cloak, clearly debating something. Then, at last, he nods. "I'll speak with Father Henry." That's more like it. You can stretch your beeswax stores only so far, and the Abbey has a stash that isn't always accounted for. Little diplomacy, a little grease, and a little wax goes further than gold in certain corners of the world. He leaves without taking anything with him, not even a sample. He trusts you, or at least trusts that you won't risk your livelihood by handing over poor work to someone who could ruin you. The apprentice watches from the far bench, whittling a bundle of new wicks. "Why do they always wait until the last minute?" he asks. "Because they think we wait too," you reply. "They think candles come out of nowhere." But you know better. Every candle begins with something that lived, whether it's the animal that gave the fat, the bee that gave the wax, or the hands that twisted the wick. Every part has a past. Even the molds carry the memory of every pour. You look out at the village road. It's busy, today's market day. And you know, if you stand quietly behind your shutter, you'll see all kinds of people who need your light, but would never admit it. There's the miller's wife, who likes her kitchen brightly lit, but claims to pray by moonlight. There's the cloth merchant who visits you twice a month to refill his cellar stock, always careful to arrive just after dusk so no one sees. Him doing business with a tradesman who still works in tallow. And then there's Chalu. And then there's Madame Lemoyne. You hear her before you see her. Her voice rises over the hum of the square, sharp as goose quill on parchment. Ka. She is dressed as usual in layers of wool, dyed deeper red than anyone else dares to wear. Her rings shine. Her sleeves sweep the ground when she moves her arms. She's the wealthiest woman in town and lives as though she were nobility, though everyone remembers her father was once fined for selling sour ale. She doesn't visit often, but when she does, it is always a performance. I require 5 wax tapers. She says before you can greet her, they must not smell of the smokehouse. The last ones did. You know they didn't. You keep your beeswax separate, your molds clean, your storage sealed. They will be pure, you're sure. As always, I'm hosting a dinner, not a funeral, she says, scanning your shelves with suspicion. No streaks, no bubbles. Q nod, already calculating what you can spare. And, she adds, I want them tall, kind that makes the table feel important. You look her straight in the eye. Tall candles cost more. She waves her hand. Then make them cost more. I'll have them before Sunday. She leaves as quickly as she came. Right. No payment up front. She never pays in advance. It's not because she lacks the coin, but because she likes reminding people she can pay when she pleases. The apprentice snorts when the door closes. Why do you put up with her? 'Cause she pays, you say, tying a bundle of flax together. Eventually, not all your customers are so difficult. There's the midwife who comes in twice a week, his hands always stained, eyes always red-rimmed. She never haggles, always buys the same kind, short, thick tallow candles that won't drip too fast during a long labor. There's the priest who orders by the crate but never uses your name in the sermon. Only those who labor in the light. And there are neighbors, quiet, steady folk who need candles to see by when the shutters close and the wind picks up and the fire dies too early in the night. These are the people who keep you in bread and shoes. You never forget that. You even trade sometimes. One of your oldest arrangements is with the widow who lives behind the forge. She brings you herbs from her garden time, rosemary, and once a sack of lavender so fragrant it masked the fat for days. In return, you give her a handful of offcuts and imperfect candles, the ones with uneven burns or sunken wicks. She uses them all the same. Sometimes you catch her lighting them in the middle of the day, just to sit beside a warm flame and think. Not everyone buys directly. Some customers come through your apprentice's odd errands. He delivers small bundles too, homes you've never entered. A few women hand him candles to be fixed, melted down, and reformed. Sometimes he brings back coin. Other times, dried apples or lumps of soap. You let him handle it. It's part of his learning. You also keep a basket near the door, one filled with rejects, broken ends, near-burnt stubs, half-melted puddles of wax. People know they can come by at dusk and take what they need. They rarely ask. They rarely thank. But the basket empties every night. You fill it again in the morning. It's a strange thing being so needed, but so ignored. Your work is in there. Homes in their hands, under their noses. Okay, but you remain out of sight until the taper burns too fast, or too slow, or not at all. And still, you make them, sometimes late at night. You watch the windows across the village flicker with light each one a tiny echo of your labor. You imagine the hands that hold those candles, a girl threading a needle by the fire, a boy reading aloud from a borrowed book, an old man whispering prayers to a saint whose name he only half remembers. You imagine what happens when the flame goes out, and you wonder, do they know where to get another? There is a hierarchy in everything. Even in light dot, you see it clearly when you open the narrow cupboard under the stairs. Inside, wrapped tightly in waxed linen and tucked between 2 blocks of charcoal to discourage pests, offer carefully ordered slabs of beeswax, golden, heavy, and faintly sweet-smelling, even after months in storage. They are your pride, not because they burn better, though they do. It's not because they smell better, though they certainly do, but because they mean status, possibility, currency. To own beeswax is one thing, to work it skillfully is another. You do both, but rarely. Most days, you work with tallow, rendered from beef or mutton fat, boiled down until every hint of bone and blood is gone, at least as gone as it ever gets. It is greasy, sticky, smoky, and it clings to your clothes no matter how much you scrub. But it is what most people can't afford. It's what they know. It's what they need. Beeswax is different. It's cleaner, more pure, some would say. Burns with a brighter, steadier flame and hardly smokes at all. It's almost pleasant to work with, too. No foul stench, no spattering, no odd hissing when it hits the mold wrong. You've dipped it before, when you had enough of it, and it's a silkier experience. The rods glide through the melted wax, like spoons in honey. The layers build quickly, and once cooled, beeswax candles hold their shape with pride, smooth, straight, and noble. But most of your customers don't want beeswax. They want the cheapest light they can get. They want something to stop them tripping in the dark, not something to show off. So you save the beeswax for special orders to the church, the manor house, the occasional visiting merchant trying to impress with borrowed elegance. There was a time early in your career when you dreamed of working only in wax. You read about the chandlers in Avignon, near the papal court, who made their living crafting wax candles for bishops and cardinals. Some even carved them into spirals or pressed them with sacred symbols. Their work glowed from golden sconces and made the prayers sound closer to heaven. But Avignon is far away. And so is that kind of life. Here, you work with what you have. You prepare your tallow in great copper kettles, simmering and skimming until the foam subsides and the fat clarifies. Then you strain it through cloth into heavy pots and begin the slow dance of dipping, over and over, layer upon layer, letting each coat cool just enough before the next. The day is too cold, the wax cracks. If it's too warm, the layers slide. Either way, you adjust, and all the while, the beeswax waits, wrapped and tucked and never spoken of aloud. The apprentice doesn't understand the difference yet. He thinks wax is wax, fat is fat, and a candle is just something to keep you from falling over your own feet in the dark. He doesn't hear the language of flame, the way you do the difference in the sputter of a bad wick, the way a pure wax candle sighs as it melts, the whisper of a flame when the air is clean, till sometimes. To teach him, you light 2 candles side by side, one tallow, one wax. The difference is obvious. The tallow flame dances, smokes, and smells like the inside of a cooking pot. The wax flame is still, steady, almost blue at its center. It gives off a faint scent of honey and warmth. Why don't we just use this all the time? He always asks, and you always give the same answer, because only a few can afford it. It's not just about money. It's about power. Beeswax is reserved. Literally, some towns have guild rules that prohibit the use of beeswax in common homes. It is for God and the noble. It's for clean places, for polished altars and marble halls. If a peasant burns a beeswax candle, someone will notice. Someone will ask how they got it. You've seen it happen a few winters ago. A weaver's widow tried to light a wax taper for her husband's funeral. She said it was all she had, left over from her brother, who worked in the abbey. But someone from the parish complained, said it wasn't proper, that it wasn't fitting. They made her snuff it out and replace it with a short, greasy stub. The dead man's face lay in shadow for the rest of the vigil. Since then, you've kept the wax closer to the chest. You don't sell it lightly. Don't offer it to those who won't know how to use it safely, politically, or practically. But the demand is always there. The church, of course, wants only beeswax. Tallow is considered impure. It smokes, it stinks, it teases, it distracts. So when you get an order from the cathedral, you deliver your finest. You press each taper with a tiny fleur-de-lis, if requested, or with a simple cross. You tie them in bundles, with linen ribbon. You bow your head when you drop them off, not out of devotion necessarily, but out of understanding. This is where your best work ends up, and it's not just local. Once a traveling bishop passed through. He was housed at the manor, and a servant came to you with a rush order for 20 long wax candles, all to match, all to be finished within 2 days. You worked through the night, burned your hands, lost half your savings buying extra wax from the abbey. But when the bishop lit one and said nothing, you knew you had succeeded. He hadn't praised you, but he hadn't complained either. That was enough in your world. Silence is the highest compliment. Still, sometimes you wish more people knew the difference between light and light, between candles that simply burn and candles that burn rightly. You remember once overhearing a conversation at the tavern, two men arguing about why beeswax was better. One said it burned cleaner. The other said it was just a status symbol. Neither of them knew that you had made both kinds, that you had spent hours coaxing shape from liquid, that you had sliced away the errors with a paring knife so fine it could be mistaken for a tool of surgery. They spoke of candles like they were nothing, like they were bought, used, and forgotten. They weren't wrong, but they weren't right either. Your candles aren't meant to last, but they aren't meant to be nothing. They are the quiet witnesses to life's unfolding prayers, whispered in the dark. Children born in silence, arguments over bread, secrets spoken before sleep, and always. The wax records it all in drips and puddles in strange forgotten shapes. Once, a customer returned a candle to you. "I lit it when my father died," she said. "I want to keep what's left." It had burned half down, stopped when a draft snuffed it out. The wick was blackened, the wax pooled and hardened into a spiral. "I can melt it," you told her. "Make it new." She shook her head. No, it was his. You wrapped it for her, carefully. She paid for a full candle, but took only the stub. That, you think, is the difference. Beeswax for the rich, fat for the rest. But sometimes, it's not about the material. It's about the moment it holds. And so, you go back to your molds, your pots, your dipping rods. The wax softens, the fat thickens, the light in all its forms waits to be shaped. But you pause just for a second and wonder, what would it mean to live in a world where everyone could afford clean light? He didn't ask for an apprentice. He arrived one morning, not with a contract, but with a sack over his shoulder, a bruise on his cheek, and a father who muttered that the boy was better off somewhere he can't ruin the harvest. His name was Martin, though you didn't learn that until the third day, and even then it came out between bites of bread, almost like an afterthought. You looked him over, skinny, sullen eyes like storm clouds over a churned field. He didn't say much, just stood by the door, waiting to be told what to do. You figured you'd lose him in a week, 2 at most. Candle work is dull, hot, and thankless. Young boys usually wander back to the fields. Once they realize the smell doesn't wash off and the burns come often. But Martin stayed. That first week, you set him to cleaning molds. He scraped wax crust from tin, dropped the iron brush twice, and asked more questions than you had answers. Why is tallow white? Can you shape wax into animals? Why do some candles hiss when they burn? You answered when you could. Other times, you told him to shut up and scrub harder. He never seemed to mind. The first real mistake came on the 5th day. You left him alone to tend the melting pot while you went to fetch a mold that had cracked. You weren't gone long, just to the next house and back, but when you returned, the workshop was filled with smoke, and Martin was fanning the flames with a tunic that had caught fire at the hem. You didn't yell. Not then. You grabbed the water bucket, doused the flames, shoved the hot pot off the coals, and opened every shutter you had. The smoke stung your eyes. The smell of scorched wool and spattered fat clung to everything. Only when the air was clear, enough to breathe, did you speak. What did you do? I wanted to see how fast it melts, he said, still holding the half-burned tunic. So I stoked the fire a bit. Fat isn't water, you snapped. You heat it too fast. It catches. I know that now. He looked down. The fire hadn't reached his skin, but the tunic was ruined. You recognized it had once belonged to his older brother. You guessed, a hand-me-down, already worn thin, now worthless. You'll wear your work clothes from now on, you said. No more experiments. That night, you found him in the shed behind the house, soaking strips of cloth in a mix of water and clay. They'll make good fire blankets, he said, without looking up, in case it happens again. You didn't praise him, but you let him hang the strips inside the workshop the next day, and they stayed. Over the weeks, Martin settled into a rhythm. He stopped asking to stir the pots and focused on cutting wicks, tying bundles, and wiping soot from the shelves. He was quick with numbers, better than you. In fact, soon began keeping count of your inventory with chalk marks on the bench. He started noticing which customers paid in coin, which in trade, and which in promises. He never mentioned his family, not once. You learned bits from gossip. Second son, too clever by half, didn't take two field work, too much mouth, too little brawn. You understood. You'd once been the same. One day, he brought you a bit of wax in a dish. It was shaped like a cat. Small, rough, but unmistakable. I tried to carve it, he said, but it kept crumbling. You looked it over. It wasn't half bad. If you want to make shapes, you said, you need purer wax. Beeswax holds. Form better. He lit up. Can I try some? No, you said, firmly. Not yet. Not until you've learned how to melt without burning. He grumbled, but he didn't argue. That was new. As winter came, you found him rising before you, already stoking the fire or arranging the rods for dipping. He worked quietly, efficiently. Once, you caught him correcting the mold alignment without being told. The candles he helped make stopped leaning. You noticed. So did the customers. Still, he had a temper. Once, when the butcher's boy called him the wax wife, Martin threw a chunk of hardened tallow at his head. Smissed. Thankfully, you made him apologize. He muttered it under his breath, but you saw the fight behind his eyes. You knew that kind of fire. You didn't try to stamp it out. You just tried to aim it. Some evenings, you sat together by the hearth after the day's work was done. He'd whittle useless shapes out of wick ends or twist strips of leftover wax into loops, and coils. You didn't speak much. Sometimes, you told him stories from when you were his age. The time a rat chewed through your drying rack. The time your first big order melted in the sun on the way to market. He listened more than you expected. One night, he asked, "Why do you still do this? Why not something easier?" You shrugged. "'Cause I'm good at it. Because it keeps the fire going. 'Cause someone has to." He nodded, slowly. "I think I want to do this too." You looked at him. His hands were nicked and reddened, wax-stained and calloused. His tunic had scorch marks, and his eyes had lost that faraway look they carried when he first arrived. He wasn't a boy lost anymore. "Then you will," you said. You didn't tell him what it meant. The years ahead, the aching back, the bad winters, the smell that never leaves your skin. You let him hold the idea like a flame cupped in two hands. But you also knew one mistake can ruin you. One careless spill. One forgotten pot. One taper lit too close to a wall. The work never forgives distraction. You've learned that. Martin hasn't. Not yet. So you watch him, teach him. Let him fail where it's safe to fail. You give him space to burn his fingers, but not his future. It's because you've come to see something in him that you don't often see in anyone else who walks into your little shop. He wants this life not for lack of options, but because something in it makes sense to him. He understands the silence between dips. He sees the way. Crooked taper leans like a tired man. He watches the light as though it's saying something, and you wonder, little what kind of candle maker he might become if the world gives him time. It begins with a chill that slides in before dawn. You know it before you open your eyes. The dampness that clings to the walls, the musty weight in the air, the strange silence outside. When you unlatch the shutter, the sky is already weeping a thin, steady rain. Not the hard hammering of a spring storm, but the long, gray drizzle that creeps into every board and beam and crevice. Rain, by itself, isn't a disaster. Your roof is sound enough. The workshop's stone walls are thick, but moisture is the enemy of candles, especially tallow. It dulls the finish, thickens the cooling, and worst of all spoils what's already made. You move quickly, stepping over yesterday's wood shavings and shooing a mouse from your drying rack. The morning light seeps in, feeble and pale. Fire takes longer to catch. Even the kindling feels reluctant. Martin arrives a little late, hair wet, cloak dripping. My stepmother says it's washing away sins. He mutters, "K," brushing the water from his sleeves. It's washing away our profits, K. You say? You go first to the storage cupboard, the one in the back, nearest the ground. The place where you keep finished stock, simple tapers, bundled in sixes, tied with coarse twine. You open it, and the smell hits you first. Rot, not sharp, like food gone bad, but something subtler, rancid, wrong. You lift the first bundle. The wax is soft, the surface is blotched and white, spotted like old bread. You peel one candle loose, the skin splits. Beneath, the fat has bloomed. Mold, you squeeze, and the candle gives like cheese. Martin winces. You don't say anything. Just pick up the entire crate and carry it outside. You dump the lot into the wet earth behind the shed. Later, you'll burn them. For now, you leave them for the rain. Was it the shelf? Martin asks. No. You answer. It was the air. You go back inside. Check the upper rack. Stare fine harder, drier, stored higher. But the batch from 2 weeks ago, the one you made in a hurry to fill market orders, gone. 42 candles. It's almost 2 weeks' work. Ruined. It's not the first time. Candle makers live with risk. Rats eat wicks, eat warps molds. Customers forget to pay. In rain quiet, invisible, creeping rain kills a batch silently. Tallow absorbs moisture from the air. The room stays too damp. Even sealed bundles can go soft. Even sealed pots can sour. You sit at the workbench and hold your head for a moment. Not out of panic. To use the disappointment for that, but because you're doing the math. The ruined batch was meant for the baker, the midwife, and 3 homes on the hill. They'll be back by week's end, expecting candles, paying little, complaining much. We can make more, Martin offers, standing stiff near the hearth. Fast. You nod, slowly. Yes, but not fast enough. The fat pot from yesterday is still there, covered with linen. You lift the cloth and sniff. It's begun to turn sour-sweet, like curdled milk and firewood. You'll need to boil it again. Skim it twice, another half day at least, before you can dip. Then drying, then wrapping. Even if everything goes well, you'll lose 2 days. Martin kicks at a loose stone on the floor. Could we mix it with beeswax? You shoot him a sharp look. He shrugs. Just a little. Stretch it. No. You say it flatly. It's not because it's a bad idea. It's not technically, but because It's dangerous, not in the fiery sense, in the reputational one. People know tallow. People know wax. They don't know mixtures. They don't want mixtures. A candle that looks fine, burns oddly, and stinks faintly of decay can ruin your standing faster than any flame. You're not a cheat. Can't afford to be mistaken for one. I'll go get fresh fat, Martin offers. You wave him off. The butcher's closed today. I can try anyway. No. You look out at the rain, still falling in fine diagonal threads. We'll start with what we have. By midday, the fire is burning hot again. The pot sweats and bubbles. Smell, familiar and foul, returns to the ear. You melt down to half-used barrels and start dipping anew. Martin cuts fresh wicks, and you show him how to loop them through the rods quickly, efficiently, without tangling. You don't waste time with talk, but your mind isn't on the process, it's on the loss. The ruined batch means you'll need to delay 2 deliveries and renegotiate a 3rd. The widow on the South Road can wait. The midwife won't, and the baker, well, he'll take half and knock off a copper denier from his payment for the trouble. You can already hear his voice, high and nasal. I could have gone to the wax seller in Ruang, you know. You can't do anything about it now. But the worst part isn't the loss. It's the waste. So much effort, so many dips, so much heat and lifting and cooling and trimming for nothing. It's for mold. Martin watches you closely the rest of the day. He doesn't speak unless necessary. Around sunset, when the fire finally dies down and the new batch hangs to dry, he brings you a bowl of water with lavender petals in it. He doesn't say what it's for. You know it's meant to clear the stink from your hands. He let your fingers rest in it for a moment, grateful for the gesture. He sits across from you, legs folded under him, staring at the half-lit ceiling. I didn't think candles could rot, he says quietly. Everything rots, you answer. Even light, you think. Even the things we make to hold back the dark. Outside, the rain slackens, then stops. The earth breathes. The village exhales. Tomorrow, you'll check the upper racks again. You'll test a new batch. You'll ride out the consequences. Quiet and patient, like you always do. But as the last of the day's light fades, you glance at the ruined pile behind the shed. It's the shape of a business you've built with your hands. Now, nothing more than meat for the fire pit. And you wonder how many more batches can you lose before the whole shop turns to rot. The market bell rings before first light. You're already awake, already sore. You've loaded the cart yourself twice. Once to arrange, and once to rearrange after Martin set the bundles too close to the tallow blocks. A dozen beeswax tapers, tied with ribbon for the wealthier buyers. 2 dozen short tallow candles for the common crowd. And 3 whole baskets of scrap ends, rejects, and partial melts for barter. You wiped your hands on your apron, nod at the mule, and tug the reins. The cart creaks down the narrow alleyway behind your shop, its wooden wheels thunking over loose cobbles. The village hasn't stirred yet. Few chimney flues beginning to smoke. Just a handful of voices from the other side of the square. Merchants with more energy than you this morning. Martin jogs alongside the cart, eyes bright. Market day still excites him. He likes the shouting, the smells, the chaos. You find it tiresome, mostly, but necessary. By the time you arrive, the square is already half filled. Fishmongers from the coast, fruit sellers from downriver, a man you don't trust selling ribbons and ink. You roll into your usual spot near the far side, under the overhang of the cooper's stall. Dry shade if the weather turns. Not too close to the pigs, just close enough to the bakery to get warm air by mid-morning. You and Martin unload the bundles, stack them by type. Beeswax in the back, undercover. Kalo near the front, where noses will catch them first. You light one of the smaller tallow candles and set it on the corner of your stall. It gives off a faint, steady smoke. That's intentional. People are more likely to buy a candle when they smell one burning. They complain about the stench, but they take one anyway. The first buyers arrive early. An older woman with missing teeth and a sack of turnips offers a trade 3 turnips for 4 stubby tallow ends. You agree? They're too short to sell on their own. A priest clerk approaches next. He picks up a beeswax taper, frowns, sets it down again. The abbey gets better ones, he mutters. Then buy from the abbey, you reply without looking up. He leaves. Martin laughs under his breath. That's why they don't like us. That's why they respect us. You? Correct? The sun climbs. So do the voices. The air fills with the sound of goats, gossip, bread crusts breaking, coins clinking. You stay mostly silent, letting the candles speak for themselves. People come for all sorts of reasons. Some need light for their homes. Others want something. Prayer, or ceremony, or a courting. Some just want to buy something. You keep your beeswax hidden until you're sure the buyer can afford it. And when they ask for it, you don't speak right away. You let the silence stretch. That's part of the art. Too eager, and they haggle you to scraps. Too cold, and they walk away. A cloth merchant stops by, pale blue sash tied tight around his middle. He inspects the wax tapers with the eye of a man who spends his life judging threads. These are pressed, he asks. Yes, he holds one to his nose, sniffs. Not much scent. Good wax isn't loud, you reply. He grunts and pulls a small purse from his belt, offers you 3 coins. You don't move. He frowns. I could get 6 of these in can. Then go to can, you say. But walk quickly. You'll need to be back before nightfall. Martin smirks again. The merchant scowls and adds a 4th coin. You nod. Deal struck. After he leaves, Martin watches you wrap the remaining wax carefully. Why do you always act like you don't care if they buy? 'Cause I don't. You lie. You do, of course, but not enough to grovel. Care? That's the trick with haggling. Care, but never admit it. Show too much need, and they bleed you dry. Not everyone is so difficult. The blacksmith's daughter stops by for her monthly bundle. 6 short tapers, tied with twine, paid in dried apples, and a bit of beeswax she traded from a spinner. You like her? She never haggles, never lies, buys, thanks, and leaves. The midwife stops by next. This time, she brings Martin a tiny jar of herbs, something to rub on the burns he still gets from working too quickly. She takes a dozen short candles in exchange, doesn't even count them, just trusts by midday you've sold more than half your stock. Not bad, but the sun is hot now. The tallow is softening. You shift the bundles into the shade and mop your brow. Martin brings you a heel of bread and a hard cheese wrapped in cloth. You eat together, quietly, watching the square fill and thin again. What's the best thing you've ever traded for? He asks. You think for a moment, then gesture toward the old stool you sit on behind the stall. That, he laughs, that wobbly thing. It was made by a man with no thumbs, you say. Best carpenter I ever met. Knew how to balance a seat like no one else. You shift on it. It creaks, but doesn't tip. He made it to barter for candles when his wife was dying. Martin quiets. You finish your meal. Later, toward the end of the day, a wealthy-looking man in a wide hat and gloves approaches your stall. You know the type: merchant, or official, or something in between. He picks up a beeswax taper, weighs it, tests its flexibility. These are for my daughter's wedding, he says. They'll be burned during the vows. You nod. I need 30, identical, delivered in 5 days. You nod again. 3 deniers each. He laughs, like it's a joke. You'd sell your whole stock for less. No, you'd say. I wouldn't. He looks at you, doesn't expect this. Martin stands straighter behind a cart. says nothing. The man leans in. It's 2 deniers. You don't blink. 3, or none. There's a pause. Then he nods. Fine, but they'd better not smoke. They won't. He pays half now, promises the rest at delivery. You wrap the sample candle in cloth and hand it back. They'll match this. He walks away, and Martin exhales. That was a lot of money, he says. Yes, you reply, and a lot of work. Do we have enough wax? Barely. The cart is lighter now. Fewer candles, fewer coins, but still progress. You count out the day's sales. Enough for flour, oil, and perhaps a bit of honey. You load what's left into the cart. Martin ties it down. The sun is slipping behind the trees. Evening approaches. Market day is over. You guide the mule out of the square as the vendors pack up. As the air cools and the scent of spilled wine and trampled cabbage lingers. You glance back once. Just a market. It's just another day, and still, you wonder how many more haggles and half-trades will it take to finally earn enough to stop bartering altogether. Back from market, with a pocket half full of coin and a head brimming with arithmetic. You do the math. 30 beeswax candles, identical, 3 deniers each, 5 days. It's possible. Not easy, but possible. And beeswax, real beeswax, is forgiving when treated with respect. It cools slowly, takes a steady form, and doesn't chatter in the mold like cheaper mixes do. But it's also temperamental in heat, sensitive to the drafts and echoes of the room it sets in. And you'll be making these for someone who will light them in a church, at an altar, under the gaze of 20 priests and a father-in-law who already thinks he's paid too much. No room for mistake, so you prepare like it's a pilgrimage. The workbench is cleared. Molds wiped twice with vinegar, once with hot water. The rods are rubbed down with cloth and ash. Martin sharpens the trimming knife while you portion out the wax blocks from your best stockpiled golden heavy slabs, wrapped in linen. It's the ones you've kept hidden for months behind the barley sacks. Martin's excitement flickers like a lantern in wind. Do you think they'll hang them from the rafters? He asks, like in stories. Or carry them down the aisle. Doesn't matter, you mutter. They'll still burn. But truthfully, you do wonder, will the candles be part of the procession, lined along a banquet table, tucked into sconces at the feet of tapestries? You try not to care. Once they leave your hands, they're no longer yours. But still, it would be something to know your work lit a moment people would remember. The first day, you get through half the batch, dipping and setting, trimming each taper to perfect length. The workshop smells of honey and warm stone. Martin watches. The curves form, quietly muttering the count under his breath like a prayer. 13, 14, 15. But then comes the second night. The air won't cool. You open both shutters. The breeze is too warm to still. The candles don't harden. They stay glossy, half-formed, like sun-wilted fruit. You wait. You shift them to the stone slab near the hearth. Still no luck. Martin suggests chilling the molds in the stream. You try it. The next morning, stay crack. Hairline fractures, visible until you trim the ends and see the lines run like veins through the wax. Too cold, you say. Martin scowls. But too warm in the shop. What now? We adjust. You don't sleep that night? Tent the fire at low heat. Stir the pot with one hand. Rest your feet on the doorframe and wait. It's like coaxing a fussy animal to much noise, and it retreats, to little care, and it wanders. By dawn, you get 4 solid tapers, cool, firm, clean. You tie them together with linen, mark them in chalk, and start again. Then, in the late afternoon, it happens. You hear the clatter before you see the damage. Martin, carrying the heavy mold from the dipping bench to the rack, trips over the hearthstone's edge. His foot stumbles. The mold, 3 days' work, 6 nearly perfect candles inside, hits the floor hard. Metal warps, wax splinters. A jagged crack splits one taper in half, like a stick of butter left in the sun. You don't speak. He freezes, looks up at you. Didn't me. You raise one hand. Still no words. He backs away. You kneel to inspect the damage. One taper ruined entirely. Two cracked. One bent beyond salvage. Okay. Only two are usable, and even they have to be smooth. Burnished, retouched. That was a whole afternoon lost. He stands by the wall, fists clenched. I should have used the bench. I was trying to save time. He let out a slow breath. Speed costs more than time. He doesn't reply, just stands, silent, until you finally say, melt it all. We'll start again. You go to the door. Needing air, needing distance. The yard is quiet. Chickens scratch at old weeds. The sky smells like distant thunder inside. Martin begins again. That night, he doesn't speak as he stirs. Doesn't hum or whistle or ask foolish questions. Just works. It's focused, grim. When you check the molds 2 hours later, the wax is perfect. Kevin, straight, quiet. You leave him alone. On the fourth day, the candles are nearly done. You polish them with soft cloth, trim the wicks to uniform length. Hold each one up to the sunlight to inspect for flaws. The only flaw left is exhaustion. You haven't slept more than a few hours each night. Your wrists ache. Your eyes burn. But the order is, ready? Martin watches you wrap each candle in linen and tie them with twine. He finally speaks. Do you think the bride will notice? You pause. No, you say, but her mother might. He smiles at that. You carry the box into the main room. The delivery is set for tomorrow morning. Martin lingers at the doorway. Sorry about the mold. You nod. Is it always like this? He asks. This hard? No, you say, honestly. Usually harder. He laughs. Just once. Dry and relent, returns to cleaning the last few tools. You stare at the finished candles, resting side by side. Identical. Quiet. And you wonder not for the first time if they'll be remembered at all, or if, like so many of the things you make, they'll simply burn, melt, and vanish, leaving behind nothing but a flicker of smoke in a darkened wick. You rise early, before the light has begun to sift through the shutters. The finished candles are already packed, wrapped in linen, nested in a wooden chest, rubbed with salt to keep out the damp. 30 beeswax tapers, clean, identical, ready. You polish your boots. You scrape the last of the soot from under your nails. You comb your beard with the tine of an old fork. You won't wear your best tunicates to coarse and smells faintly of vinegar, but you'll wear the cleaner one. The one with the patched sleeve that no longer scratches. Martin waits outside, shifting from foot to foot. He's tied the chest down on the mule cart and double-checked the straps 3 times. The road to the manor isn't long, but it's an even mud route, one shallow ford. You both know what one jolt can do to a box of finely finished beeswax. Don't bounce the turns. You say, I won't. Don't try to steer with one hand. I won't. Don't. I won't, he says again, gently, and you let it rest. The ride takes just under an hour. The mist still clings to the low grass, and the trees are slick with dew. As you approach the manor, the road widens slightly. The hedges are neatly trimmed. The stone walls rise with quiet authority. There are no guards, just a wide iron gate, and a boy in livery who barely looks old enough to hold a shovel. Let alone speak for a house like this. Candle delivery, you say. Stepping down from the cart, the boy eyes you both, then the box. Do you have a seal? You open the linen flap of your belt pouch and remove the scrap of parchment, stamped in red wax with the merchant's crest, the father of the bride. The boy squints at it, shrugs, and waves you forward. The main house is too clean. You've seen churches with less polish. Every stone in its facade has been scrubbed or replaced. The shutters are painted blue, and the smell of lavender clings to the entry like perfume clings to silk dot inside. You're met by another boy, one older, well-dressed, holding a ledger. He doesn't speak much either. He leads you to a hallway filled with sunlight from tall windows, then through a side door to what must be a private receiving room, not a grand hall. Just a small place for controlled transactions. That's where you meet her, the lady of the manor. You expected the groom's mother, or perhaps the steward. But it's the bride's mother herself, Lady Marguerite. Though you wouldn't have guessed it by her size or her plain tunic. She sits near the window, her hands folded in her lap. Silver gloves, real silver, threaded into silk glint faintly in the morning sun. So, she says, you're the candle maker. You bow your head. She doesn't rise. She gestures to the chest. Let me see them. You unfasten the leather straps, lift the lid, and fold back the linen. She leans forward, not too close, and examines them without touching. Her eyes are sharp, cold, not cruel, cool, but calculating like someone trained to see flaws first. Martin stands silently beside you, his arms stiff at his sides. These are all beeswax, cool? She asks. Yes. From where? Local. She nods, slightly unmixed. Yes. She doesn't question the answer. She moves on. They're clean, she says. Even then, her fingers, silver-covered, slower each toward one. She touches it, lifts it, examines the base. You filed. These smooth, after casting. Then again, after cooling. She turns it slowly. No wick scoring. Trim after polish. You add. She nods again. The priest says it's important that the candles not hiss. They won't. You say, I've heard otherwise about tallow makers. These aren't tallow. That makes her pause for a breath. Then she smiles very slightly. No, they aren't. She sets the candle back into the chest. They'll burn during the ceremony, she says. Then they'll be taken down, stored. You're surprised. Not used for the feast. She shakes her head. Only for the vows. The rest of the light will come from torches and oil lamps. Candles are ceremonial. You nod, saying nothing. Ceremonial, of course. They want the look, not the flame. She motions to the boy with the ledger, who counts the tapers quickly, then steps forward. With the pouch. You don't open it. Not here. Not in front of her. 3 deniers each, she says. It's agreed. Then her eyes shift to Martin. He straightens. She stares at him a moment too long. You apprenticed. She asks him. Not formally, he says. HM. Then to you. You should register him. Something happens to you, your work dies with you. You nod, politely, but you say nothing. She's not wrong. But she's also not the one who'll pay the tax to register an apprentice. She stands, finally, brushing down her gown with those silver-gloved hands. Thank you for the delivery, she says. Then, they are very fine. You take care with your work. You bow again, a little deeper this time. When you leave the manor, the sun is higher. The mule chews at a patch of grass. The gate swings open without being asked. Martin waits until you're on the road. Again, before speaking. Do you think she liked them? She said so. But do you think she meant it? Huh? You glance at the pouch in your lap. It's heavy enough. She paid. But she'll remember the candles. You say, if something goes wrong, if they sputter, if they crack, if they smoke, if nothing happens, she won't think of them again. Martin looks down. You nudge the mule forward. That's how it is, you say. In this work, being forgotten is how you know you did it right. Still, as you bump along the road home, you think about her silver gloves, her sharp gaze, the way she spotted the base first. You've made hundreds of candles before, delivered them to churches, merchants, fairs, and homes, but rarely to a woman who watched you like she could tell your whole story from the texture of one taper. And now you wonder, will she keep one? It's just one unlit. for the chest in the attic? Or will they all burn and be swept away, melted into memory like the rest? You have just returned from delivering the wedding order. The chest is lighter, your pockets are heavier, and Martin has already gone off with a few coins to buy rye bread and the good soap from the widow 2 lanes over. You imagine he'll come back smelling of pine, resin, and pride. Dow is done. Successfully, you're stoking the hearth and scraping the cooled wax from the ladle handles when a knock sounds at the door. 2 slow, heavy raps. Not the kind of knock a neighbor makes. You wipe your hands, smooth your tunic, and open it. It's the CHURCHWARDEN. Not the priest. Not a clerk. The Warden Jean of St. Michel. A man with heavy eyebrows and a voice like gravel dragged through oil. He has no title beyond warden, but everyone listens when he speaks. Not because they like him, but because he holds the church's keys hand, the purse strings for every candle ever lit at the altar. Maker, he says. Warden, you reply. He doesn't smile. He never does. You step aside to let him in. He takes 2 slow steps into your workshop, eyes adjusting to the gloom, and then begins the same ritual every church official performs when visiting your kind. He sniffs. He squints at the rafters. Hey, lifts a piece of wax from the trimmings. Pile and rubs it between his fingers like it holds a secret. Tallow. He asks. Yes, not for the altar. I know. He walks over to your supply shelves and peers at the wax blocks. Beeswax from your usual source? Yes. Still pure? Yes. Prove it. You expected that. You reach behind the upper shelf, unwrapping the linen bundle marked with a charcoal exert test slab. You hold it under his nose. He doesn't sniff like a candle buyer. He breathes it in like a man trying to catch someone in a lie. Burn it, he says. You light a taper, set the slab's edge over the flame. It melts slowly, smoothly. The smell is clean like honey, but less sweet, more solemn. It drips in clear beads. No hiss, no smoke. Still, he watches for a long time before speaking. This year's quota will be raised. You frown at the church's allotment. He nods. We want double the candles this season. The feast of St. Remigius is drawing. More pilgrims. That's in 6 weeks. He doesn't blink. We expect 6 dozen altar tapers, beeswax, polished, without impurity. You look past him, toward your racks. You have maybe 10 days' worth of good wax in stock and payment. He shrugs. As usual, it means late. In coin, if they have it. In grain, if they don't. You step past him toward the table, as if checking on something, but really to give yourself a moment. Double the quota. 6 weeks. And not just any candles altar tapers. These aren't the stubby ones you make for village doorsteps. These are pure, straight, weighty, burned, long, and slow, washed by clergy, judged by clergy. Candles that must not fail. The order from the manor already cut into our stock. You say then, work faster, the warden replies. Your hands tighten around the edge of the table. And, if I decline, you ask. Careful. He doesn't answer. Immediately, then he turns toward the door. When light fails in the church, the people will come looking for the one who let it happen. He steps out without saying goodbye. You stand there for a long time after he's gone. Martin returns not long after, whistling with a wrapped loaf under one arm and his face shining from soap. Bread and bath, he says cheerfully. 8. We get another order. You nod, slowly. From who? The church. He stops smiling. Big, double quota, 6 weeks. Kay drops the loaf on the table. Do we have enough wax? No. Can we get more? Maybe. He chews his lip. We can't tell them no. Co. You sit down on the stool by the workbench. Elbows on knees. It's not the labor that weighs on you. It's the calculation. To make 6 dozen altar tapers, You'll need pure beeswax, touched, unblended. That means paying full price for raw wax. That means long hours of casting, trimming, polishing. That means everything else, village orders, small barters, even the winter stock must. Wait, what if we stretch it? Martin suggests. A little mix, just a little, just for the base. No one would notice. You look up sharply. We'd know. He nods, abashed. Sorry, it's tempting though. But no, the church notices, and if they don't, God might, at least in their minds. The next day, you begin scouring the countryside. You visit the beekeepers. Widow 3 villages over. She has 3 blocks of wax. You buy them at a markup. You barter with the miller's cousin, who has a jar of cappings of leftover golden shavings from a crushed hive. You clean them with boiling water and strain them through cloth. Martin rides to the abbey orchard, returns with a message. One of the monks has 10 slabs of aged wax, but wants 24 rushlights in exchange. You take the deal. Soon, your workshop fills with the scent of beeswax, so thick it clings to your clothes. You scrub your tools again. You stack the molds. You mark each batch carefully. The work becomes mechanical, dip, cool, trim, polish, stack, repeat. But the pressure stays in the air. It's like smoke. These aren't candles for profit. These are candles for salvation. They must be perfect. One crack, one hiss, one smoky flare and the whole town might think you've sold the church darkness instead of light. One evening, as you polish the 15th taper with a cloth dipped in oil, Martin asks softly, "Do you think God cares about candles?" You keep rubbing. "I think people care that God cares." He nods, slowly. Another candle joins the stack. By the end of the 4th week, your hands are blistered. Martin's eyes are red from smoke. The workshop is a cave of gold and silence. You've spoken barely a dozen sentences between you in 2 days. Everything is heat and wax and the quiet echo of work. At night, you dream of candles melting into each other, dripping into your shoes, drowning you where you stand. And still, you wake and work again. Each finished taper gleams like polished ivory. Each one carries a burden. But will the church warden notice? Will the townsfolk see? Will the priest offer a blessing? Will anyone thank you? Or will these 2 flicker out unseen, their only legacy, a stain on the stone floor and a wick lost in ash? The feast day arrives like the turning of a tide, slow at first, then sweeping. Church bells begin before dawn, peeling through the cold mist that curls down from the hills. By the time you lace your boots, the streets already carried the low hum of early pilgrims, voices muffled by wool and frost. Inside your workshop, 32 altar tapers wait, each one wrapped in linen and laid into shallow chests lined with straw. They have been ready for 3 days now. You dared not leave them to the last moment. There's no excuse if they fell not today. It's not on the most public, sacred, and candlelit celebration of the year. Martin helps you lift the chests onto the handcart. You've rented a sturdier one just for this double wheels, oiled axles, padded sides. He steadies it as you guide it up the slope toward the church square. You know the road well, but today it feels different, as if the stone is watching you, as if each loose cobble carries a question. By the time you arrive at St. Michel's, the square is full. Pilgrims from surrounding parishes press shoulder to shoulder beneath banners and garlands. Traders hawk dried apples, wooden icons, small loaves stamped with the bishop's seal. You skirt the edge, avoiding jostling elbows and careless boots. At the church steps, a priest greets you, not the one you know. Not Father Eloy, but a younger one, nervous looking. He holds a wax seal, matching the token the warden gave you last week. Suet. He nods, then steps aside. The side door is opened. You enter with Martin. 2 monks follow behind to close it. Inside, the nave is empty of people, but full of scent. Incense, beeswax, soap, faint traces of rosewater. The pillars are wrapped with vines and dried lavender. Cloth banners hang like slow-moving waves from the rafters. The warden is already there, waiting in the chancel. You bow. He doesn't respond. He gestures to the altar. You unpack the first chest slowly, deliberately. You hand each candle to Martin, who places them in iron holders mounted on tall, narrow stands behind the choir benches. 12 in a row, 4 for each aisle, 4 near the transept, 4 beneath the small window depicting Saint Remigius baptizing. Clovis, the final 4 go on the high altar itself. You place them there yourself. Their wicks are trimmed to uniform length. Their polish is smooth. Their bases fit perfectly into the holders. Martin whispers, "They look like ivory." You step back. The warden examines them. He does not speak. Then, finally, he nods. You leave quietly. No coin exchanged. Not now. Payment will come later, when the feast is done, when nothing has gone wrong. Outside, the crowd has grown. The bishop is due to arrive before the first mass. You and Martin return home to change clothes, clean tunics, modest but neat. You'll return not as workers, but as parishioners. When you come back, the church is full. Not one space remains along the nave. Martin squeezes into a side pew. You find a spot near the back by the font. Your neck aches from looking forward, but you can just see the flicker of the altar candles. They are lit, and they burn steady, pale, silent. The mass begins. The bishop intones the opening blessing. The choir sings a verse of Dies Irae, softened for the occasion. You don't know the words, you barely follow the Latin, but you watch the candles. Every breath of wind, every shift in light, you see it. They burn clean, no sputter, no drip, until halfway through the homily. A sudden change. A draft from the south transept window lifts a corner of the bishop's robe, and the 5th candle near the apse's left side flickers just once, and then begins to drip, slowly, one thick bead of golden wax. Then another dot, then a third, down the iron stand. Toward the cloth carpet beneath, you feel your breath hitch. Martin sees it too. His hands tense in his lap. The warden doesn't move, nor do the clergy. Only you seem to notice. You lean forward. Flame itself stays firm, but the wax is shedding. The candle is melting faster than it should. There's nothing you can do. It must have been slightly softer, slightly warmer. Perhaps it cured too quickly near the hearth. Or perhaps the draft caught it just wrong. You remember that day? You had 3 trays curing side by side. One cooled late into the evening, you suspect. That's the one. It's too late now. The wax pools gently at the base. Okay? It doesn't touch the cloth. A monk notices at last. He steps forward discreetly with a silver dish and places it beneath the stand. The homily continues. No one else reacts, but you feel it in your stomach like a twist of rope. You leave after the final hymn. You can't stay. Martin finds you back in the shop, sitting on the stool, your hands curled around the edge of the table. It didn't burn out, says. You nod. No one noticed. He adds. You nod again. But still, he says. Still, one candle, out of 30-2. And still, it weighs on you more than all the others. You stare at the tools laid out on the bench, the dull knife, the smooth sticks, the spool of wick. What do you think the bishop would say? Martin asks softly. You don't answer, because you know what you would say if it had been someone else's candle. You would say, single drop doesn't damn the work. But it reminds you that the fire doesn't forget. You say nothing, though you just sit there while the feast goes on outside. And the bells ring again and again into the cooling dusk. The day after the feast of Saint Remigius, the sky turns gray. Not just the normal gray of passing clouds, but the heavy, waiting kind that presses down on the rooftops and closes up the throats of chimneys. You can smell it before it begins, the musty, coppery scent of wet dust about to come undone. You leave the shutters open, watching it arrive. Martin has gone to the Coopers to see about a new barrel. He still speaks cautiously around you, unsure if the single dripping candle has left a permanent wound in your mood. You've said little since the feast. He's said too much, too kindly. He doesn't yet understand that some disappointments are best left unsweetened. When the rain begins, its soft, needle-thin threads tapping against the stones. By mid-morning, it grows louder until it pounds the tiled roof in waves. You light a stub of tallow and sit near the window, tying off leftover wicks and counting your stock without really meaning to. You hear the knock just after midday. 3 soft taps, then silence. Not a merchant's knock, not a child's. You open the door. It's the widow from 2 streets over, Agnes, small and slight, bundled in a damp shawl that clings to her shoulders like ivy. She doesn't speak right away. Her eyes are sunken and red, not weeping, just hollow from a kind of tiredness you've seen before. The kind that has no energy left for drama. "Do you have any light?" she asks. You gesture for her to come in. She stands just inside the doorway, not moving further. "I've none left," she says. "Not even stubs. I thought I could stretch them, but..." She trails off. You nod. You don't ask why she waited. You know why? Money, pride, timing, grief. Her husband died last spring. Her son went to sea in June and hasn't been heard from since. Sue scrapes by with spinning work, a few sewing commissions, and what neighbors drop off without asking questions. "I can pay in thread," she offers, "or bones for glue. Not good ones, but..." You shake your head and turn to the shelf. There's a small row of imperfect tallow candles, slightly slumped. Wick, too long, uneven base, not fit for the market. But they burn. You wrap 3 in a square of old cloth and hand them to her. She hesitates. "I'll trade," she insists. "Later," you say, "when you have enough." She starts to protest. You lift one hand, firm. It's rain and dark, and your fire's gone cold. This is the wrong day to haggle. Her eyes flicker. For a moment, she looks like she might argue again, but instead, she tucks the bundle into the crook of her arm and nods. She lingers a moment longer. "I lit the last candle the night before last," she says. "Kept it until the wick touched bone. Sat by it for hours." You wait. She shrugs. "I don't even remember what I was thinking. Watching it." You nod. "It makes you feel like time's holding its breath, doesn't it?" She's right. It does. You say nothing as she slips back into the rain when the door shuts behind her. The workshop feels heavier, but not worse. You sit back down. Outside, the rain has begun to flood the gutter by the road. Water pools beneath the window, and the hearthwood crackles in protest. You stand again and go to the shelf. The supply is low. Beeswax near empty. Tallow nearly gone. But you don't panic. This is the rhythm of the trade. Feast day, rush. Famine day, silence. Bulk orders, quiet barters. A visit from the churchwarden, followed by 4 days of nothing but candle-ends and doorstep gossip. A feast. A failure. A widow in the rain. Martin returns a while later, barrel in hand and questions on his face. You don't answer. He doesn't press. You light another stub and set it in the center of the table. It leans slightly, flickers with a whisper of smoke, settles. The room steadies. Martin slices bread. You pour broth. No feast, no firelight joy. Just a meal by a single candle. A crack in the roof starting to drip again, and a faint echo of someone else's sadness still hanging in the air. And yet, this feels more real than the manor or the church. No fanfare, just a flame where one is needed. You glance at the stub. The wick curls like a thread of hair, dancing gently as it eats its own light. You wonder, not for the first time, how many of your candles are out there still burning? How many tiny fires you've made? How many lives they've seen? And how many have vanished without a trace? The first time you hear the word guild that month, it's not from a merchant or a city clerk. It's from a traveling chandler who stops by the village on his way south. His horse is tired and his cart is chipped, but his shoes are polished, and his hands are too clean to have handled tallow in weeks. He introduces himself as ETN, and he speaks with the easy rhythm of someone who hasn't had to explain himself in a long time. Martin finds him first, trying to ask the baker if there's anywhere in the village he can compare wax samples, which makes the baker laugh so hard he nearly drops his kneading stone. Eventually, the man is pointed your way. You greet him, cautiously, offering no chair, but no coldness either. He seems harmless at first, a man of small talk and polished habits. But then he opens his pack and unrolls a small scroll with a red wax seal bearing the mark of the Guild of Chandlers from Tours. This district is being considered for inclusion, he says. You raise an eyebrow. It already has a candle maker. Course, he replies, but not yet a registered one. You nod slowly. You've heard of the guild, of course, mostly in distant terms, restrictions, taxes, apprenticeships, privileges. In the cities, they wield real control. In towns like yours, they're mostly talk. But if they're reaching out now, it means someone's pushing for expansion. Someone wants dues from the provinces. Martin stares at the scroll like it's made of silver. The man unrolls it further, revealing a neat list of terms minimum wax, content, mold standards, apprenticeship durations, inspection schedules. It's to protect your trade, he says smoothly. It's to ensure fairness. You rub your fingers together, feeling the tacky wax dust from yesterday's cooling tray still clinging under your nails. Fairness for whom? You ask. For all, he replies. For buyers. For the church. For craftsmen like you. You look him in the eye. You haven't lit a taper in weeks. He smiles. I don't make them. I represent those who do. You hand the scroll back. I already represent myself. He pauses, then inclines his head. You'll think it over? You nod. But you already know you won't. That night, Martin reads the scroll aloud 3 more times. There's a rule in here about wick threads, he says, and a wax purity clause. You grunt. They want you to submit your molds for inspection. You say nothing? Martin studies the document, as if trying to see his own future between the lines. The next morning, carrying a mold rack down from the loft, Martin slips. It's the same stone on the same stair that's always been crooked. His foot lands wrong. His wrist twists, and the corner of the iron rack lands hard on the top of his thumb. The sound it makes is dull. The sound he makes is worse. You rush to him, ease him down, try to pull back the cloth, already darkening with blood. He shakes his head. It's broken. I know it. You've seen enough smashed knuckles and cart-pinched fingers to know. He's probably right. The nail is already purpling, the joint swollen. You send a neighbor boy to fetch the midwife. She's not a bone setter, but she knows what to do. She arrives with strips of willow bark and a bottle of something that smells like burnt herbs and vinegar. She splints the thumb with 2 pieces of shaved wood and binds them tightly. He won't be dipping for a while, she says. You nod. Martin winces as she ties the final knot. Will it set wrong? Only if he uses it too soon. He won't. He'll make sure of that, which means, for now, it's just you again. The workshop feels heavier with him, gone from the rhythm of things. Your tools are where they always were. Your molds, your pots, your waxaw, unchanged. But now, you lift everything alone. It slows you. It quiets the space. You find yourself talking to the wax again, in full sentences, but in murmurs, the way you did before Martin. The way you swore you'd stop doing at the end of the week. A stranger comes to the door. He says he's from Cannes, passing through, but he knows too much about wick gauge and too little about wet ash. He asks to see your molds. You show him. He asks about your beeswax. You lie and say it's from farther away than it is. Then he asks to see your apprentice. You say he's resting. He glances around the shop. Then he smiles, but there's no warmth in it. When he leaves, you feel your lungs tighten. The guild has sent another. They're circling now. The question is, why now? You sit by the hearth, carving another wick guide, and you wonder, was it the manor wedding? The church tapers? Did someone report your name up the chain? Or is this simply how it begins quietly, with questions and scrolls, until suddenly, the work you've done your whole life is no longer yours unless you pay for the right to keep doing it. Martin tries to lift a mold 3 days later and nearly drops it. You scold him, gently, but firmly. You've got to wait. He frowns, but you're falling behind. I'll fall further if I have to remake what you ruined. He nods, ashamed. You soften. We'll manage. You say, we always do. Come. But inside, a new thought starts to take root. What if managing won't be enough? Come. What if the scrolls keep coming, and the inspections begin, and the coin that you barely scrape from? Each taper must now be divided with people who've never touched a vat of wax in their lives. And what if, one day, the light in your shop, this small, smoky, sacred light, is no longer allowed unless someone else says so? The last of the summer warmth fades in the third week of the month. Leaves begin to dull. The sky turns pale. Your fingers crack more easily when working the wick, and Martin wraps his splinted thumb in cloth before going out into the morning air. Though he still can't mold or carry trays, he's back in the shop, again oiling the hinges, sweeping wax, flakes from between the floorboards, boiling twine for future batches. He's quiet, lately thoughtful. You don't ask why. You suspect it's the pain, or perhaps the sense that some shift has begun between you and the world outside. You've managed to fulfill the smaller autumn orders, photos for All Souls Day, rushlights for the vineyard keepers, a handful of stubs for the traveling priest who insists on lighting his own tapers rather than relying on whatever the parish offers. Nothing large, nothing complicated. And then, near the end of a cold morning, the bell over the shop door rings. It's a woman hooded, dirt-caked at the hem, and carrying a carved walking stick that's clearly been repaired more than once. Her cheeks are weather-worn, ruddy. Her eyes are dark. Her left shoe is newer than her right. You recognize the signs. A pilgrim. She doesn't remove her hood. I need one candle, she says. Long-burning, pure wax. Nothing that hisses. You nod. Altar length? No, she says. Shorter. Something I can carry. You pause. A vigil light. Exactly. Martin reaches for the shelf, but you shake your head and step in. You want it for a shrine? You ask. She nods, but says nothing more. You take down a modest taper narrower than an altar candle, but heavier than a votive. Trimmed and polished, its base wrapped in linen to protect it from moisture. This one will burn a full day. You say, if the wind is kind. She stares at it for a moment. How much? You hesitate. It's worth a denier. Maybe 2, 3 farthings, you say softly. She doesn't blink. Just hands over a single coin worn, clipped, but real. You don't test its weight. You don't insult her. She starts to leave, then pauses. Her voice lowers. Will it reach him? You glance at Martin, then back to her. Reach who? Am I? Son. You say nothing. She touches the candle's base with her thumb, as if sealing it with a blessing. He died in spring, she says. Before he could take the road with me, I carry his name. Satchel. Speeds. I light the candle for him every shrine I pass. This will be the 5th. You nod. Then yes, you say. It will reach him. She doesn't thank you. Fa. She looks at you like she's memorizing your face. Then she goes. Martin turns back. to the workbench, silent. You remain still for a moment. Then you say, "What does she think it does?" He shrugs. She knows he's dead. You continue. She knows it won't change anything. She doesn't want change, Martin replies. She wants a bridge. You return to your trimming. All afternoon, the smell of cheese drifts into the shop. The market stalls have set up down the lane new wheels of sheep's cheese rolled out for the feast of St. Gall. You used to barter candles there in spring and autumn. Now you rarely go. Okay? The time, the coin, the risk of pickpockets, all reasons to avoid it. Okay? But today, with the pilgrim's voice still in your ears, you find yourself drifting toward the door. "I'll be back," you tell Martin. The stall is where it always is, under the brown awning near the grain cart. A boy tends the wheel, shaving slices into leaf wrappings. You buy a small triangle and eat it with your hands as you walk. Then, out of nowhere, a voice stops you. Do you believe they matter? You turned out. It's the same man who came asking about your molds. The one from Kenor who claimed to be. He's leaning against the corner post of a shop stall, chewing something from a cloth pouch. "What matters?" you ask warily. "Your candles. Do you believe they matter? To God, I mean, or to the people who light them?" You don't answer. He continues. "I have seen thousands of them, lit, extinguished, offered, forgotten. Do you think the wax carries anything other than heat?" You look at him. "Why do you care?" you ask. He smiles again, that thin smile you didn't like the first time, because someday, he says, they might tax faith itself. Okay? If that happens, someone will need to decide how much a flame is worth. You don't reply. He shrugs and walks away. You finish your cheese. The smoke from the sausage cart wafts into your face. Later that night, sit by the hearth and watch one of your test stubs burn. Martin is asleep in the corner, hand cradled like a wounded bird. You stare into the candle's tiny flame. You think of the widow who burned her last light before asking for more. You think of the lady in silver gloves. You think of the church warden who measured salvation by the dozen. You think of the pilgrim with her fifth vigil, and of a boy's broken thumb, and a guild that wants to price your work into neat little squares of parchment and red wax, and of one candle, just one, that dripped too soon, but still lit the altar when it was needed. And the question lingers, still unanswered, floating in the soft flutter of flame. What is a candle really for if not to burn for someone who'll never see it? The mornings are colder now, sharp. Everything snaps underfoot, wigs, leaves, even your breath in the air. Martin starts waking before you again, like he used to before his thumbs swelled purple. It's healing now, though stiff, he can hold. A knife again, and last night he dipped 2 tapers without shaking. You didn't say anything then, but you noticed it's frost on the roofs by the time you've stoked the hearth. You spend most of the morning chopping firewood, not because you're out, but because your body needs the rhythm. Splitting, stacking, reaching, breathing, a pattern to quiet the thoughts. The guild hasn't returned. No letters, no inspectors. Not yet, but you know they will. That man from Cannes, whoever he truly was, didn't come for curiosity. There's something building. You feel it in the way merchants have started asking for certified makers. Key, in the way a neighboring parish requested only guild-registered stock for their holiday mass. In the way the baker now eyes his flour, waits twice, and the tanner's boy counts his pelts aloud before handing them over. People are preparing for something. Change, crack down coin, and yet your hands keep making light. At midday, Martin tells you the cooper is selling his shed. Said he's going to move south, closer to his daughter. You nod. He asked if you'd want the shed. You blink. What for? Martin shrugs. Storage. Or, if you wanted to hire another apprentice, you give him a look. He chuckles. I'm not leaving, you say. Nothing. sip your water and glance out the doorway toward the muddy street and the clouded sky. Later that day, child comes to the shop barefoot, cheeks raw, holding a bundle wrapped in twine. He says nothing at first, places it on the bench and steps back. You unwrap it carefully. Inside, 4 iron candle holders, a pewter snuffer, a cracked taper mold, and a note on roughed parchment for the one who doesn't cheat the wick. From someone who once did. God bless your fingers. There's no signature. You glance up, but the boy is already halfway down the lane. You keep the snuffer. It's clean. The mold is useless, but you turn it over in your hands anyway, wondering who sent it. A rival, a priest, someone who saw your candles and found them too honest to compete with. That night, Martin says softly, "We could still leave." You look at him. "Join the guild," he adds. "Move to tours. You could register, get better prices, protection." You stare into the flame. "It's not just the work," you say. "It's this place, this corner, this hearth, these tools. They know me." He nods. "But the guild will keep coming," he says. You nod to dot outside. A dog barks once and falls quiet again. The street is still. No carts pass this late. No one knocks after sundown anymore. Even the widow's window is dark tonight. You stare at the shelf where the pilgrim's candle sat before you handed it to her. A stub now, carried on the road, burned at a shrine, it's gone into smoke. Like so many of yours, you wonder if her son ever knew candles were made like this, that someone shaped them by hand, breath fogging the wax in winter, that someone cut each wick to a measured thread, that someone burned their own hands once, just to check the cooling time. Martin is still watching you. You sigh. "What would you do?" you ask. Someone said you could keep working, but not as yourself. He thinks about it. "I'd leave," he says finally. "I'd go somewhere I could still be me, even if it meant less coin." You nod, but you're not sure you could start over again. The shop is too full of ghosts, of old wax, of quiet, perfect mistakes. The next day, the frost doesn't melt, stays white along the thatch and under the wheels of the carts. You light a single tallow for the corner shelf and start trimming the last of the autumn batch. Martin works beside you, cutting wick in silence. You don't speak, and the quiet that settles over the workshop is intense. It isn't heavy. It's the kind of quiet that comes before something changes. Not suddenly, not loudly, but like a crack spreading slowly through ice, like a flame, steady and unseen, making its way toward the end of a wick. The fire in the hearth is slow to catch this morning. It's been like that lately. Coals reluctant, logs damp. Smoke curling back toward your eyes, as though the house itself is second-guessing the season. Martin kneels by the kindling, coaxing it with a broken piece of taper stub, blowing gently until the bark hisses into embers. You watch the smoke rise, then turn back to the day's work. Your fingers feel thicker lately. Not stiffer, not exactly, but duller at the edge. It's like tools that once had precision, but now work by instinct more than finesse. You light a beeswax test taper and set it in a corner to check the draw of a new wick batch. It burns upright, steady. You write a small mark in the margin of your notebook and return to straining cooled tallow through linen. Then the door creaks open. A boy, again maybe 12. Maybe younger, no shoes, patched sleeves, brown curls matted. By wind, he steps inside, eyes wide. You glance at Martin, who shrugs. The boy holds out a rough cloth parcel. No words, just a hand extended. You unwrap it carefully. Inside is a single candle stubby, crooked, with 3 wicks jammed into one, end like a fork. It's half melted, blackened at the edges, badly shaped and clearly used. You look at the boy. He clears his throat. Won't die. You blink. What? The candle, he says again. We light it. And then he shrugs. Shh. Keeps going. You exchange a glance with Martin. He gestures the boy to sit on the bench by the window. You retrieve a taper stub and a small tray. Gently, you take the strange candle and press it into the wax pool of a dish. Where did you get it? You ask. The boy shrugs. My sister found it in the ruins, out past the tannery, near the old stones. You raise an eyebrow. Do you want to keep it? He asks. Why bring it here? He shrugs again. Mother says it's cursed. It lit 4 days ago, and it's still burning. You pause. It wasn't made here, you murmur, inspecting it again. Martin leans closer. Looks like tallow, but not clean. Mixed with something. It's that hair. You nod. Could be. There are superstitions. Of course, the old kind. Candles made from body parts. Candles that summon spirits. Candles that burned cold. You've never made one. You've never seen one, but you've heard. You dip a matchstick and touch it to the wick. It flickers, smokes, catches. The flame is uneven, green for a second, then orange, but then it steadies. You watch it for 10 minutes. It burns like any other. Martin says what you're both thinking. It just has a slow draw. Thick tallow, coiled wick, tease. Not cursed, it's just stubborn. You nod, still. You don't want it on your bench. You place it in a jar and slide it under the shelf. The boy doesn't seem disappointed. You hand him a plain taper in return. Take this instead, you say. It'll burn properly, safely. He grins. Thanks. And just before leaving, he asks, will you be here long? You frown. Why? He shrugs. Some say you'll be gone soon. Like the Cooper. You nod slowly. Maybe. Maybe not. He runs off. Martin looks at you. You don't look back. Instead, you pull out a piece of parchment. You've been meaning to write a letter to the guild, to the bishop, to the manor steward. You're not sure yet. Perhaps to all of them. Perhaps to none. You dip your pen, but the words don't come. You set the pen down. That night, strange candle still burns under the shelf. You haven't moved it. You don't want to touch it again. The thought sits with you as you eat cold stew, hard crusts. Martin mumbles about his thumb. He can flex it now, he says, though it clicks sometimes. You nod, but your mind is on that candle, on the boy's voice, on the slow, unending burn. That night, after Martin is asleep, you go back to the bench. You kneel, open the jar, and watch it again. It shouldn't still be burning, but it is. A low, lopsided glow, whispering like a breath that won't finish. You pinch the wick. It flares once, then fades. Gone. The wax is nearly gone too. You press the jar lid back on, then sit in the dark, thinking of letters you haven't written, thinking of how long light can last when no one expects it. Dot, and wondering if you left, if you walked away from the only trade you've known, but anything you've made keep burning behind you. The day begins quietly. The frost from the night before lingers on the shutters, giving the window glass a pale, breathless look. You dress slowly. Martin is already at the hearth, trying to light a kindling bundle with a stubborn flint and a curse that bounces low under his breath. The fire finally catches. You both sit, eat stale bread with broth, and begin the morning's work. You're halfway through a dipping cycle working through a batch of tallow for a local church order when you hear hooves outside. Not clattering hooves, not a cart or merchant mule. These are careful steps, deliberate, with a pause between each strike on the cobbles. Martin straightens. You keep dipping, then the knock. 3 short taps, followed by 2 slow ones. When you open the door, the man standing outside looks nothing like a traveler. His cloak is dry, his boots polished, his hands are gloved but clean, and his hair, gray and drawn back into a short tail, is tied with a black ribbon that hasn't seen dust in weeks. He smiles thinly. Master Chandler, Janad, I've come on behalf of the Guild of St. Honor. he says. Sit off a lion. You exhale softly through your nose. He produces a scroll fresh, clean, sealed with a heavy wax crest. This is a notice of proposed review, he says. Your production records, your apprentice's status, your molds, your measures. Q. Take the scroll without opening it, and if I refuse, smile doesn't waver. You are free to decline. You wait, he adds. Of course, in that case, your candles may not be accepted for church use, nor sold at certified markets, nor distributed within municipal zones without penalty. You close the door before you answer. Martin speaks first. That's it then. They're here. You don't reply. You walk back to the bench and begin trimming a wick. Calm, even, but your hands are tight. The thread breaks under your knife. You start again. You don't open the scroll. You place it on the table and leave it there. 2. As hours pass. You dip 3 more batches. Dry your hands. Stoke the fire. And refuse to look at the thing. At midday, the door opens again. This time, it's not a guild man. It's a carpenter's apprentice with a crate of small nails wrapped in a linen sack. From the cooper, he says. He's gone south, but he said, you might need these. You accept the gift, though you have no use for them right now. You set the box beside the shelf and thank the boy. He lingers. They say they'll be sending someone to check weights at the market, he says, even for bread. You nod. They say they'll measure everything, even light. You don't answer. He looks at your wall, your tools, your row of cooling stubs. They say soon no one will be allowed to sell unless they carry a stamp. You nod again. He leaves. That night, you finally break the seal. You read the letter aloud to Martin. It's polite, official, cold. You are requested, not required, to present yourself in tours within the month, to register, to submit samples, to comply. Failure to appear will not be punished, but it will be noted. Martin listens in silence. Then he says, you knew this was coming. You nod. They're going to take it from you, aren't they? You don't reply. Later, in the dark, you burn the scroll. You feed it into the fire in slow strips, watching the blackened curls of vellum twist like leaves in a wind you can't feel. The smell is sharp. Oil and glue and ink. Martin watches, but doesn't stop you. You burn the seal last. It hisses, crackles, melts into an angry lump of wax that bubbles, then hardens into something shapeless and gray. The next morning, it's ash in the hearth and frost on the windows again. You go to the shelf and light a plain, ordinary taper. Nothing special, no tricks, no blessing, just light. It flickers once, then S-T-E-A-T-S, like it always has, like it might again. But the silence hangs between you and Martin all day. It's not tensioned, just the kind of silence that waits for a choice, waits for you to decide if you'll stay and fight, or walk away before the rules write you out of your own life. And you can't help but wonder, if a candle burns when no one is allowed to see it, is it still light? They say the nights grow longer after Martinmas, but you never notice it quite so clearly as now. It's not just the time the sun disappears, or how much would you burn. It's something quieter, a feeling in your chest. The way the dark fills your small house like water slowly rising in a cracked boat by the second week of November. You've grown used to waking before dawn and still finding it pitch black. Martin sleeps longer now. His thumb is almost healed, but he uses the extra darkness to stay beneath the blanket and pretend he's not yet needed. You don't mind? You light the hearth before he stirs, boil water for the wax softening pot, okay, and sweep the floor while the house is still mostly shadows. You haven't spoken of the guild letter since the night you burned it. The topic hovers near everything now, like the smell of ash long after a fire's gone out. Each day, you both do the work. Each evening, you both sit quietly and eat. And each night, Sky outside the workshop stretches darker and darker, as if it's trying to erase something it no longer wants to remember. On one such night, wind howling, shutters rattling, wax hardened early from the cold, you blow out the last taper and head upstairs to sleep. And that's when you hear it. A clatter, not loud, not violent, just enough to catch your ear, okay? Like a stool bumped against a wall, quote, or a lid nudged from a jar. You freeze on the stairs. Martin, behind you, stops too, its breath visible, even indoors. Then another sound, this one clearer, the creak of the side door. The one you lock only with a peg. You move fast. Martin grabs the iron poker from the hearth without thinking. You both round the corner into the workshop, where the shadows still pool in the corners, and the coals cast everything in deep, flickering amber. The door is ajar. There's someone there, a figure thin, quick, moving with practiced silence, reaching toward the bench. You don't shout. You don't need to. Your foot hits the corner of the stool, and the clatter alone is enough. The figure bolts drops what they were holding and slips out the door like smoke. You rush to the threshold and fling it open. Nothing, just wind, wet stone. A dog barking far off. The thief is gone. Martin checks the bench. A bundle of half-molded tapers lies on the floor, still slightly warm from the last pour. Nothing else seems taken. The tools are in place. The wax hasn't been touched. The coins, what little you keep there, are untouched in their tin. But still, someone came. Someone entered your quiet world. Not a guild clerk, not a bishop's boy, not a merchant's courier, just a thief. Someone from outside. Martin leans against the wall, gripping the poker tight. You sit down on the bench and stare at the coals. The workshop suddenly feels smaller, not because of the thief, not even because of fear, but because something has changed. Someone believed your candles were worth stealing. That idea sticks with you all night. You don't sleep. At dawn, you find Martin at the table, making tea from old leaves and a pinch of dried apple. He doesn't speak. You sit down beside him. There's a wedding next week, he says. It's the one at the priory. You nod. 3 altar tapers, 4 table ones, and a set of votives. I thought we could shape them with rosemary, he adds. You blink, like your mother did, he explains. For blessings. You smile faintly. You've nearly forgotten that. He stirs the tea. Then he asks, not looking at you, do you still want to leave? You pause. I don't know. You say honestly. He looks at his cup. I think I'd stay. You nod. Even if they come. Again, even if they tax the air we breathe, he says. There's silence, not the heavy kind. It's just long. The longest night is nearly here, the vigil before Advent. In the city, they'll light grand candles for it, layered with scents and dyes and twisted in fancy molds. Here, it will be simple. Just your tapers, your wick, your fire. You spend the day shaping rosemary, keen to the wax. It smells like something ancient, sharp, green, faintly medicinal. It reminds you of your mother, of illness and healing, of birth rooms and blessings, of windows open in winter to let out bad spirits. You finish the votives just before sunset. You wrap them in cloth and tie the bundle tight. And then, for no reason you can explain, you take one stub the leftover edge from the thief's failed grab band, place it in a bowl by the door. You light it, you leave it burning, and you say nothing. Martin notices. Of course, but he doesn't ask. The candle burns through supper, and through the folding of cloth, and through the winding of wicks, until finally, just before you go to bed, you kneel by the bowl and whisper a single question to the flame. If they take everything from me, my shop, my name, my tools, my rights, what part of me still belongs to the fire? The candle doesn't answer. It never does. But it burns. And that, for now, is enough. The storm begins long before the clouds arrive. You feel it in the stiffness of your joints, okay? in the way the floorboards flex under your heel, in the pressure behind your eyes as you measure tallow into the melting pot. The wind hasn't risen yet, but it's coming. The sky is the color of old pewter, the same hue as a widow's forgotten comb. And it's heavy with something more than rain. Martin mutters about the gutters as he shoulders the ladder and climbs to clear the thatch of leaf fall. You mix beeswax with tallow more slowly than usual, as if the air itself is thick by the time the wind arrives. It doesn't whisper, it howls. The shutters rattle, the back wall hums. Outside, something loose, probably a clay tile or a sack of grain, flies past the window and disappears into the dark. You work by candlelight. Not your tapers. Those are for others, for church altars and bride chambers and parish corners. You use the leftovers, the bits too short to sell. Ends dipped for testing, stubs from votives no one paid for. Their flames flicker orange and blue in the drafty corners of the shop. Martin comes in, soaked through, clutching a handful of bent nails from the ladder. "We'll lose a shutter if this keeps up," he says, teeth chattering. You dry him off, feed him broth, and set one of the old rosemary votives by the table to settle the smell of wet wool. Then the knock comes, barely audible through the shriek of wind. You don't move. At first it comes again. Martin opens the door, and the cold pushes in like a fist. On the threshold is a woman you've seen once or twice from the edge of town. She works for the midwife, sometimes cleans, carries, keeps the linens folded. But now her face is pale and taut. She holds a bundle. You recognize the shape before she speaks. A small, wrapped infant, swaddled tightly, not moving. "We need a candle," she says. Your hands go cold. "For the baptism?" You ask, already reaching for the small altar tapers. She shakes her head. "For the end," she says quietly. You glance at Martin, who's already unwrapping a beeswax stub. You trim the wick. You light it. You hand it to her without a word. She presses the candle into the crook of her arm beside the child, nods once, and disappears into the night. You close the door. Gently, Martin doesn't speak. Neither do you. You've made candles for weddings. It's for shrines, for the comfort of priests and the pride of wealthy merchants. But the ones for the dying, those are the only ones you can't finish without. Your breath catching just slightly in your chest. You sit down at the bench. You reach for a spool of thread, but your fingers stop short. Instead, you pull an old nail from a box and, without fully knowing why, you hammer it into the wall just above the window where the stormlight flashes between gusts. It's not for hanging tools, not for shelves, just a nail, something solid, something driven in deep. Martin watches. He doesn't ask. That night, the wind screams. A roof tile shatters somewhere down the lane. A horse breaks loose from its tether and gallops into the fields. It's gone before anyone can catch it. You stay inside. You light a test taper and let it burn without trimming the wick dot. Gutters, mushrooms, and smokes. But still, somehow it glows, and you find yourself thinking about permanence, about how long light lasts, about how many things you've made in this shop that are already gone, burned to nothing, ground to stubs, melted in rain. But you also think about what remains, not the wax, not even the wick, but the moment of lighting, that breath held, that silence before the flame rises. That's what they carry with them. That's what you've given done. The morning, half the village is mending roofs. The cooper's old shed has lost its door. The cloth merchant's cart is missing a wheel. But your shop, your little crooked candle house, still stands. Martin finds a scrap of parchment blown in from the priory. To him, half-inked, Water Street. You hang it beside the nail. Not nailed, just draped. A reminder, maybe, that you're still here. That some things don't burn, even when they should. You turn to your molds. The order for the priory wedding is due in 2 days. You begin trimming the new wicks clean, sharp, white cotton and ready the wax to heat again. You don't talk about the guild. You, Dan, talk about the city. You don't talk about what might come next. Instead, you look at the stub candle, burning on the corner table, the one lit during the storm. It's still going, and you wonder if no one comes to see it, if no one knows it was ever lit. Does it still count? Okay, the days are shorter now, but they feel longer because you measure them in light. Not in sunrises or church bells, but in the number of tapers trimmed, of stub, ends burned, of wicks prepared and counted out across the bench. You've stopped expecting the guild's return, not because you think they've forgotten you, but because you've quietly decided what you'll do when they arrive. Not leave, not register. You'll remain exactly as you are. It's not defiance, not really. It's continuity. You are a chandler. You make light. That is the sentence you live by. On the morning of the Priory wedding, you rise early. The frost has settled thick on the sill, and a blue mist hangs in the alley. Martin is already up, wrapping the votives in clean cloth, counting under his breath. For on the altar, he says, to by the doorway. One for the offering. You nod and carry the tray out. Together, the wedding is simple, not one of wealth. No silver gloves or silk veils. Just two people, nervous, hopeful, clinging to one another under a roof that smells faintly of damp stone and old rosemary. You light the candles yourself. One wick flutters, casps, almost dies, but it holds. They always hold. Afterward, a woman from the Priory places a few coppers in your palm, more than the candles cost, but less than she wants to give. Thank you, she says. They glowed just right, not too proud, just steady. You say nothing. It's the highest praise you've had in months. When you return to the shop, you take out a mold you haven't used in years. It's old, dented, from before Martin even came. The edges are worn. One side sticks slightly. It's the mold your mother used for vigil lights. The ones she taught you to dip one layer at a time. The ones she called the remembering candles. Clean it slowly. Melt the beeswax with care. Pour it by hand. You don't use the dipping frame today. You don't measure the temperature with the iron pin. You just feel it, like she used to, like your fingers remember, without needing words. Martin doesn't ask. He watches, then sets out. The trimmed wicks beside you. You work together, one layer at a time, letting it cool. Then again, it takes half the day. By evening, you have a dozen candles, not large, not scented, not for show, just light. You don't mark them for sale. You place them on the shelf above the bench. Each one a little uneven, each one a little like you. That night, after the shop is locked and the pot is scrubbed, Martin says he's thinking about teaching. Not now, he says. Someday. When you're ready to rest. You smile. You don't tell him that rest isn't something you ever expect. You don't tell him that you've already taught him everything you know. Instead, you unwrap a candle from the new mold and set it in the dish by the window. You light. It doesn't flicker. It doesn't hiss. It just glows. You sit beside it and speak softly, so that the flame understands. This is for no one, and for everyone. This is the one I keep. Outside, the village is quiet. Inside, the walls are still warm from the day's work. You look around and realize nothing here is new. Not the shelves, not the nails, not even most of the tools. But it's yours, all of it. Not because you paid coin, but because you gave time. And time is the only currency fire truly understands. You'll remember all of it now. The pilgrims, the widows, the thieves, the guilds, the silence, the burn, the endless making of something designed to disappear. You realize your whole life has been spent shaping what will vanish, and yet it's the vanishing that mattered most. A flame burns, then it's gone, but someone remembers it. even if only as a soft glow in a corner of a cold room, even if only as warmth against a prayer, or the flicker at the edge of someone's last breath. In the end, you are not remembered by your trade. You are remembered by your flame and what you chose to do with it. Good night.